Welcome back. This is day 4 of asexual reproduction. Today's aim is how does mitosis form identical daughter cells? So remember, when we're talking about mitosis, we're just talking about cellular division. And when you see this phrase, identical daughter cells, remember we're just talking about the fact that those cells are going to be genetically identical. They have the same set of DNA. But how does that happen? Let's find out. First thing you guys have got is a do now. So go ahead and pause this video, answer questions 1 through 3, and press play when you are ready to review them. So number 1, marine sponges contain a biological catalyst. Remember, that's just another word for enzymes. So they contain an enzyme that blocks a certain step in the separation of chromosomes. Which cellular process would be directly affected by this catalyst? Well, the answer here is going to be A, mitosis, because remember, in mitosis, in order to form those two genetically identical daughter cells, we have to duplicate and then separate those chromosomes to make sure that each cell gets the same set, or the full amount of chromosomes. And specifically, it's going to be blocking the step called anaphase, where those chromosomes actually split and are pulled apart. Okay. Number 2, which two processes are involved in mitotic cell division? This is just a fancy way of saying mitosis. So what has to happen in mitosis? Well, I just told you guys that we have to duplicate and then separate those chromosomes. Okay, so another way of saying that is C, nuclear duplication and cytoplasmic division. Now, I know these are some really big words, but nuclear is just another way of saying the nucleus duplicates, right? The nucleus multiplies itself by 2, and then the cytoplasm is going to divide. So those cells are going to split into 2. All right, and number 3, the ability of cells to pass on their characteristics to new cells is most directly related to the ability of what? All right, this answer is also C. In order for cells to pass on their genetic information, the chromosomes have to replicate, because remember, we have to make sure that each daughter cell is genetically identical and gets that full set of information. So if we can't duplicate or replicate our chromosomes, that doesn't happen, right? So the answers there were A, C, and C. Which leads us to part A, cell division in animal versus plant cells. So by now we know that cellular division happens in multicellular organisms, right? This happens in humans, this happens in plants, this happens in animals. But it's going to look a little bit different in animals versus plant cell division. And we're going to figure out why in just a second. But the first thing we're going to do is read through a passage. So as always, follow along with me as we read this, make any annotations on your paper, and then we're going to use that information to answer questions 1 through 3. So let's get started. During cell division, the genetic material must be replicated and then divided equally. During mitosis, the chromosomes of a cell are divided into 2 equal groupings. Following mitosis, the cytoplasm and contents of the cell divide in a process called cytokinesis. Afterwards, each of the new cells has a complete set of chromosomes and organelles, just like the original cell. The 2 new cells are called daughter cells, right? And we call them daughter cells because they are produced by the parent cell. They are the offspring of that parent cell, which means the cell that they came from, which no longer exists, is called the parent cell. All right, so let's use that information to answer questions 1 through 3. Question 1, why is there no longer a parent cell once the cell has undergone cell division? So we just read that the cell that they came from, which no longer exists, is called the parent cell, but why doesn't that parent cell exist anymore? Where did it go? Pause this video, answer that question, and then press play when you figured it out. All right, so number 1, the parent cell actually splits itself into the 2 daughter cells after it replicates its chromosomes. So there is no parent cell because it has just given away its genetic information to those 2 offspring cells, to those 2 daughter cells. So the parent cell duplicates its DNA and then passes it on to its children. And the parent cell stops existing after that because it has already given away all of its information. But a little piece of it lives on within those daughter cells, right? Number 2, what is the process of cells finally dividing into 2 called? Okay, take another look at this passage and press play. Pause this, figure it out, and then press play when you figured it out. That was not a sentence. I'm trying, guys. It's Friday afternoon. All right, so the process of those cells actually dividing into two is something called cytokinesis. Now, we typically combine the two processes of telophase and cytokinesis because they're really similar. But with telophase, in the last stage of mitosis, the cell is just getting ready to split. So in anaphase, the chromosomes have already pulled apart to the other sides, but in telophase, you can see right here, the cell is kind of stuck in this like cleaved motion where they're still connected, they're separate, but they're still connected in the middle. And that is where we get this process of cytokinesis. Now, if you break down this word, we've seen the word cyto before. We know that's talking about cell, but this word kinesis means movement. So cytokinesis means cell movement. That is when the cell kind of like gives itself a karate chop and like splits this cell in half. So that cleavage furrow is going to form, which pinches off the cell. And cytokinesis is how that cell actually physically splits and moves apart. So cytokinesis, cell movement, that is when the cell actually divides itself and to create those two daughter cells. Now, number 3 requires you to look at this picture that has been provided. How is mitosis different in plant versus animal cells? So I actually want you guys to, again, pause this video, take a pretty close look at this diagram, and figure out where do you see the main difference between plant and animal cell mitosis. All right, and press play once you figured it out. All right, so hopefully you see that the main difference is actually in this stage of telophase and cytokinesis. And we can see that in animal cells, the cell is going to pinch in to divide, right? We see that something called a cleavage furrow forms, which basically slowly pinches in that cell membrane and pulls it apart to separate it. But it looks a little bit different in plant cells, and that's because we have that extra organelle, right, called the cell wall. So in plant cells, when mitosis happens, a cell wall actually physically forms between the two cells to separate them and push them apart. So you can see right here, a wall or a barrier is going to form between those two cells that eventually splits them apart. So the main difference here is just that presence of the cell wall in plant cells again. All right. Now I know that my text thing was covering it, so I'll give you guys a second. In animals, the cell pinches in to divide. In plants, the cell forms a cell wall to divide. And moving on. The last thing we're going to talk about today is something called cancer, which I'm sure you guys are all very aware of. In fact, many of you probably know someone who has been affected by cancer. But what causes cancer? Well, we've described cancer as cell division out of control. Now, I think that you guys know a process that is known as cell division. In fact, I think it starts with an M, maybe mitosis. Oh, okay. So would you believe me if I told you that cancer is actually caused by uncontrolled mitosis? It's just cell division. So let's read a passage about that and then use that to answer question number 1. So the disease known as cancer results from uncontrolled cell division. Cancer cells do not seem to follow the rules or recognize the signals that control normal cell division. Uncontrolled cell growth can occur in many different types of cells. As a result, there are different types of cancer, such as skin cancer and many others. There does not seem to be a single cause for all types of cancer. Factors that do cause cancer do so by damaging or changing the cell's DNA. Now, we've seen this phrase before. Remember, we call a change in the DNA a mutation, right? So cancer, or factors that cause cancer, are going to cause mutations in your DNA. And these factors that cause cancer include different things like the exposure of cells to harmful substances or mutations, such as certain chemicals or radiation. And we're going to call those factors that cause cancer carcinogens. Okay, so carcinogens is a word for cancer-causing factors. Okay, so now using that information, pause this video, answer question 1, Press play when you're ready to review it. So what is cancer and what are some of its contributing factors? Well, cancer is a disease caused by uncontrolled cell division. This is just uncontrolled mitosis. Your body naturally has like mechanisms in place to stop this from occurring, but sometimes the cancer cells just don't follow the rules and they're going to keep dividing even when your body is saying, "Hey, stop that. Stop doing it." The cancer cells don't listen. They just keep dividing until it forms like a growth that shouldn't be there. And some contributing factors are exposure to harmful substances that we call carcinogens, like different chemicals and radiation. So there are a lot of carcinogens. In fact, you can Google the word carcinogens and see a lot of research being done to figure out what exactly does cause cancer. Right now, there really is no one pinpointed reason, but there's a lot of different reasons or a lot of different factors and carcinogens that can cause this to happen. So take care of yourself, be safe, guys, because cancer is really scary and affects a lot of different people. So using that information, really ending on a negative note there, use that information to answer questions 1 and 2 on your exit ticket. Let me know if you have any questions and have a wonderful weekend. I will see you guys on Monday.